She almost didn't open the door. That's the part nobody talks about. The moment right before everything changes. When you're standing on the other side of wood and hinges, rifle in hand, heart hammering, and you have every reason in the world to send strangers away. Every reason to say no, and mean it. Abigail Thornfield had those reasons, stacked up like firewood going into October. But she opened the door anyway, and nothing about her life was ever the same after that. The autumn wind came across Montana like something alive that year. Cold, restless, and full of warnings. It rolled down from the mountain ridges just before sundown, rattling the fence posts, pushing through the gaps in the porch railing as if it were testing the place. Testing her. Abigail stood alone on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sky turn dark red behind the mountains. 6 months ago, she had buried her husband, Samuel, behind the barn. The wooden cross she'd hammered into the frozen earth was still there. Slightly crooked now, tilted by the spring thaw, and never straightened. She hadn't been able to bring herself to fix it. Some things felt right, left the way grief put them. Since Samuel died, the land had felt heavier. The fences broke faster than she could ride out to fix them. The cattle pushed against weak posts, testing every weakness the way trouble always does. And every night, somewhere far out past the tree line, the wolves called to each other across the dark. A sound that used to seem beautiful to her, and now only reminded her that she was alone. At 32, Abigail was still young. People said so. She didn't feel it. Grief had added years to her face that the calendar hadn't earned yet. Her hands were rough now, cracked at the knuckles from cold water and hard work. Her hair, once her one vanity, the color of dark honey, she kept pulled back in a plain knot. There wasn't time for anything else. The neighbors had helped at first. They'd come in the weeks after the funeral with covered pots and gentle words, sitting at her kitchen table with that particular expression people wear when they don't know what to say but feel they ought to say something. She'd appreciated it. She had. But kindness fades when there's enough trouble of your own to tend to. A widow running a 300-head cattle operation alone was something the valley whispered about. Some said she'd sell before the first snow. Some were already making quiet calculations about what the land might fetch. She was about to go back inside, to the cold stove and the open ledger and the numbers that never quite added up, when she saw them. 2 riders coming up the dirt road. Her body went still, the way it does when instinct speaks before the mind catches up. Visitors were rare this far from town. Visitors near sunset were something else entirely. She stepped back to the doorframe without thinking, her hand finding the rifle she kept leaning there the same way you find a familiar wall in the dark. The riders slowed at the gate. The man dismounted first. He was tall, wearing a long coat that had once been dark brown and was now the color of everything the road does to a man over time. Faded, patched, honest. His movements were deliberate and careful in the way that sober men move, men who are paying attention to the world around them. Behind him, still sitting on the horse, was a child. The man removed his hat. "Ma'am," he called out. "Name's Nathaniel Blackwood. I was told you might be needing a ranch hand." Abigail did not lower the rifle. "Who told you that?" "General store in town. Man named Henry." Said Widow Thornfield was running her place alone. Said she was too proud to ask for help, but might not turn it away if it showed up. That sounded exactly like Henry. The man had a gift for accurate observations he had no business making. "And you just happened to be passing through," she said. Nathaniel glanced back at the child before he answered. There was something in that brief look, a checking, a reassuring, that told her more than his words did. My daughter and I have been riding 3 weeks, he said. We need work and a place to winter. I can handle cattle, mend fences, do what needs doing. I don't drink and I don't gamble. You'll get honest work for whatever you can pay. The girl slid down from the horse then, and Abigail felt something move in her chest. A shift, subtle but real, like ice beginning to give at the edge of a river. The child looked to be about 7, thin in the way children get when meals have been uncertain. Her dress was covered in the fine gray dust of long travel. She held a worn cloth doll pressed tight against her side with both arms, the way you hold something you've decided is the one thing you're not going to lose. Her eyes were dark and too large for her small face. The eyes of a child who had seen things children shouldn't have to process. Papa, she whispered. I'm cold. 2 words. Abigail had heard harder things. The doctor's voice in January. The silence of the house after the funeral. The cattle lowing in the dark when there was no one to check on them. But those 2 words hit her somewhere undefended. She studied them both for a long moment. The man's boots were worn thin at the heels, but clean. His coat had been patched in at least 3 places, the stitching careful and tight. Everything about him said poor, but nothing said careless. The child's dress had been lengthened twice. She could see where different fabric had been stitched at the hem, 2 separate times, as the girl grew and her father did his best to keep up. But it was their eyes that made the decision for her. She had seen that particular look before. It was the same look she'd seen in her own mirror every morning since January. Loss. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly. The kind that just quietly takes up permanent residence behind everything else. You can put your horses in the barn, she said finally. There's hay in the loft. When you're done, come inside. I've got stew on the stove. Relief moved across Nathaniel Blackwood's face like light through a break in clouds. He caught it and put it away quickly, but she'd seen it. We're obliged, ma'am. As they led the horses toward the barn, the wind picked up, rattling the last dry leaves across the yard in small, urgent circles. Winter was coming. But for the first time in 6 months, Abigail did not feel entirely alone facing it. Inside, she set 3 bowls on the table. Her hands paused over the 3rd one. 3. She stood there a moment, just looking at the arrangement. It felt strange. It also felt right, in the way that unexpected things sometimes do. They came in clean, or as clean as the circumstances allowed. The girl's hair had been hurriedly braided. Nathaniel stood in the doorway with his hat in both hands, straight-backed in the way of a man who carries his dignity carefully because it's one of the few things he has left. Come in, Abigail said. Evangeline, Evie, her father called her, stepped into the warmth of the house and stopped. Her eyes went wide at the firelight, the quilts on the walls, the smell of food. It's pretty, she whispered. Then she caught herself and looked at her father quickly, as if she'd said something she wasn't supposed to. It's all right, Abigail said, and she surprised herself with how gently it came out. Would you like to help me set the table? The girl nodded and carefully set her doll on a chair, gave it its own seat, arranged it just so, then went to help. Over supper, the cabin held something it hadn't held in a long time. Conversation. Nathaniel ate slowly, grateful but measured. Evangeline fought to stay awake over her bowl, losing the battle in small degrees. How long since her mother? Abigail asked quietly, when the child's eyes had finally closed. 4 months, Nathaniel said. Fever took her. Silence settled for a moment, but it was a different kind of silence than the one Abigail had been living in. Shared silence. There's a difference. And you've been riding since? Working where we could. Most folks don't want a hand who comes with a child. Abigail understood that truth down to her bones. People avoided complications. They had enough of their own. After supper, she showed them the small storage room near the kitchen. 2 bedrolls could fit. It wasn't much, but it was dry and warmth was the currency of November in Montana. "You're offering us the job?" Nathaniel asked. "I'm offering a trial," she corrected. 2 weeks, fair wages and board. You earn it, it becomes something more permanent. You don't, we part with no hard feelings. They shook hands across the table. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of survival on both sides. That night, standing at her bedroom window, watching the small light of the barn lantern glow in the distance, Abigail could hear Nathaniel's low voice through the thin wall as he settled his daughter to sleep. She couldn't make out the words. She didn't need to. The house didn't feel empty the way it had. The wind outside didn't sound quite so much like loneliness. The first week passed in a blur of cold mornings and work that started before sunrise. Nathaniel rose early and found Abigail always already up. Coffee on, ledger open, the numbers being wrestled with by lamplight. He respected that about her. She didn't complain. She didn't perform suffering. She simply worked. By the 3rd day, he'd repaired the worst stretch of fence along the north pasture and fixed the broken hinges on the chicken coop. The ranch had been running on stubbornness and nothing else. Now it had a little room to breathe. Evangeline changed the most. The quiet, guarded child who had arrived clutching her doll began to come alive. She collected eggs with focused care, learning quickly how to move around the hens without startling them. She scattered feed in even lines the way Abigail showed her. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a needle and thread while Abigail guided her small hands through the motions of a tight, even stitch. "Small stitches make strong fabric," Abigail said. "They hold better because there are more of them." Evangeline's tongue pressed to her bottom lip in concentration as she practiced. Across the room, Nathaniel pretended to oil a saddle and watched his daughter learn the thing her mother had never gotten the chance to teach her. His chest ached with it in a way that was somehow also something close to gratitude. The real test came when it was time to move the cattle down from summer pasture. 300 head couldn't be managed by 2 people alone, and they both knew it. "We do it in stages," Abigail said, studying the hills from horseback. 50 at a time. Nathaniel hesitated, then said, "Evie can ride sweep." Abigail looked at him. "She's 7. She's been in the saddle since she could sit upright. She needs to feel like she's part of this, not someone being kept out of the way." After a long moment, Abigail nodded. Evangeline's face when they told her was something neither adult forgot. She climbed into the saddle and sat up straight and serious, doing her best impression of a professional. "Steady and calm," her father reminded her. "Cattle feel what you feel." She surprised them both. The girl had an instinct for it. She'd anticipate a breakaway before it happened, use her voice and her horse's presence to guide nervous cattle back into the group without spooking them further. By afternoon, more than half the herd stood safely in the lower pasture. "Professional work deserves professional pay," Abigail said, pressing a silver dollar into the child's palm that evening. Evangeline stared at the coin as if it were made of something rarer than silver. That night, the kitchen filled with flour and laughter as she and Abigail attempted bread together. And lost. When Nathaniel walked in to find them both dusted white and grinning over a lopsided loaf, he felt something he hadn't felt since before the fever took Martha. He felt, for just a moment, like he was home. The morning Pike Morrison arrived, frost lay over the ground like a second skin. Abigail saw the three riders coming and recognized the kind of visit by the way they rode. Purposeful, unhurried. The deliberate pace of men who believe time belongs to them. Morrison was large, pale-eyed, with a scar that pulled the left corner of his mouth into a permanent sneer. He represented Cyrus Hartwell, the largest landowner in the territory. A man who acquired smaller ranches the way other men collected grievances. Methodically, without sentiment. "Your cattle have been wandering onto Hartwell land," Morrison said. "That's not possible," Abigail replied. "We moved them last week." "You calling me a liar?" Nathaniel stepped forward from behind her, calm as still water. "Show us the strays. We'll bring them back ourselves." Morrison's eyes settled on Nathaniel with a particular assessment of a man deciding how much trouble something will be. "Mr. Hartwell is of the opinion that an operation this size may be more than a widow can manage alone. Winters are hard country. Accidents happen to people who are overextended." The word accidents dropped into the air and sat there. Nathaniel's voice went very quiet. "Sounds like a threat." "Concerned neighborliness." Morrison's gaze drifted toward the window where Evangeline stood watching. "Dangerous country for children, too." "Men disappear in this country," Nathaniel said, still quiet, still utterly still. "That's worth remembering." Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Morrison offered his thin smile and turned his horse. "Tell your fencemen to check the lines," he said, and rode off. After they were gone, Abigail realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the effort of keeping it from her voice. "Who is Hartwell?" Nathaniel asked. "The kind of man who thinks owning enough land means owning the people on it." She paused. "He's been buying out smaller ranches for years, any way he can." That night, Nathaniel moved his bedroll into the main room between the front door and the hallway without being asked. He cleaned his rifle by the fire and didn't say anything about it. Later, after he'd tucked Evangeline in, Abigail heard her small voice through the wall. "Will you protect Mrs. Abigail too?" And his answer, "I'll protect everyone in this house." Abigail stood in the hallway and didn't move for a long time. The smoke woke Nathaniel before his eyes opened. He was on his feet in seconds, hand on his rifle, mind assembling the smell into its meaning even before the horses started screaming from the barn. "Abigail!" He was already moving down the hall. "The barn!" She appeared in her doorway, already pulling on her boots. No panic, just focus. "I'll get Evie, you get the horses." The west wall of the barn was fully engaged, flames climbing fast through old, dry timber. Sparks flew into the black sky and were carried by the wind toward the house. Nathaniel went straight in. He moved through the smoke with a forearm over his face, throwing stall doors open, feeling the heat press down on him like a physical weight. Horses bolted past him. He counted them as they went. One short. Buttercup, Evangeline's mare, stood frozen against the far wall, paralyzed with terror the way horses get when fear overrides everything. Nathaniel grabbed a saddle blanket, threw it over the animal's head to block the sight of the flames, and pulled hard on the lead rope. The roof groaned above them. Move! The mare stumbled forward, and they came out of the barn together, just as a section of the roof fell inward, throwing sparks 30 feet in every direction. Outside, Evangeline stood wrapped in Abigail's arms, crying for 3 kittens that had been sleeping in the loft. The cattle fence had broken under the pressure of panicked animals, and the herd was scattering into the dark. Nathaniel and Abigail worked without speaking, each covering ground, pushing the herd away from the house. Evangeline held Buttercup steady and murmured to her until the mare stopped shaking. By dawn, the barn was ash. The winter feed was gone. The tools were gone. A season's worth of careful preparation burned in hours. Nathaniel walked the ruins slowly and found what he'd expected to find. Hoofprints that didn't belong. The blackened stub of a torch thrown into the hay. "This wasn't an accident," he said. Abigail looked at what remained of the structure. She didn't cry. "They wanted us to break," she said simply. The neighbors came with the smoke still rising. Tom Patterson rode in first, reading the situation without needing it explained. By afternoon, wagons were arriving with lumber and tools, and women carrying enough food to feed everyone through 3 days of work. By evening, guards had been posted at the edge of the property. "We raise it bigger than it was," Patterson said. That was the entire discussion. They worked from first light to last for 3 days, building something better than what had burned. When the last beam was set, the new barn stood taller and stronger than the one Hartwell's men had destroyed. He had meant to break her. Instead, he had united everyone she knew. But Hartwell wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, on a moonless night, riders surrounded the house. Nathaniel was awake before they arrived, some combination of instinct and vigilance that had kept him alive through harder years than this one. He woke Abigail quietly, positioned her and Evangeline in the root cellar, and stepped onto the porch alone. Pike Morrison's voice came from the dark. "Blackwood, come out." "I'm out," Nathaniel said. The accusation was cattle theft, delivered with the confidence of a man who doesn't need evidence because he's never needed it before. Nathaniel listened to all of it without changing expression. Then more riders came up the road. Tom Patterson, Marshall Brennan, and a dozen armed neighbors, drawn by the same community network that had rebuilt the barn. "Show me the warrant," Brennan said coolly. There wasn't one. Morrison and his men rode off. The yard was quiet again. But everyone standing in that yard understood clearly. This wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until Hartwell decided it was. Or until someone decided it for him. With Marshall Brennan's help, they made that decision. Evidence was gathered. Records of threats. Records of fraud. The testimony of men Hartwell had pushed too far over too many years. When Morrison returned the third and final time, when he came for Evangeline, thinking leverage was still a card he could play, Nathaniel was between them before Morrison's hand finished moving. What followed was quick and final. Morrison did not leave the property alive. Hartwell was arrested and charged within the week. Federal men rode in from the capital. Witnesses testified. Records were examined by men with the authority to act on what they found. Cyrus Hartwell's empire came apart in a courthouse the following spring. The valley breathed. Grass pushed up green through soil that had known fire and blood, the way grass does, indifferent to what happened on top of it, and reliable as anything in this world. One evening in late April, with the mountains still wearing their winter white above a valley that had fully turned green below, Nathaniel and Abigail stood together on the porch. Evangeline was in the yard chasing fireflies, her laughter carrying clearly in the evening air. "I knocked on your door looking for work," he said. "You knocked on my door looking for somewhere to winter," she said, "and found a home." He turned toward her. "Marry me." Not for the ranch, not for protection or convenience or anything practical. For love. Because I want to stop counting the reasons this is complicated and start building the thing we've already been building. She looked at him for a long moment. Tears gathered in her eyes without falling. She smiled, and it was a different smile than the careful, managed expressions she'd learned to wear in the months after Samuel's death. This one came from somewhere she hadn't thought to look in a long time. "Yes," she said. They married under a cottonwood tree with the whole valley watching. Evangeline went ahead of them, scattering wildflowers from a basket she'd filled herself, absolutely serious about the task, brow furrowed with the responsibility of it. Afterward, while neighbors laughed and fiddles played and the air smelled of spring and wood smoke and food, the girl climbed onto the porch between them and looked up. "Are we a real family now?" she asked. Nathaniel put his arm around her small shoulders. "We were a real family the night I knocked on that door. Some things just take time to make official." Abigail kissed the top of her head and held her there. Years later, children's laughter filled that house, not just their own. The house took in others over time, one by one, the way people do when they understand what it means to need a door to open. Orphans and strays, anyone arriving at the edge of winter with nowhere else to go. The ranch prospered. The barn stood against every storm the mountains sent down. And on quiet evenings, when the autumn wind moved across Montana again like something alive and cold and restless, Abigail would sit on the same porch where it had all begun and remember. The lonely widow who almost didn't open the door. The tired man with worn-out boots and a daughter who was cold. The small girl holding a cloth doll, with eyes that held too much loss for someone so small. All it had taken was a knock and the courage. The specific, terrifying courage to say yes.